The action of the manhwa begins in a huge temple, which is located in the western state of Qin. A male commander of a Sigma squad orders his men to bring the groom. We then watch a guy with beautiful, long white hair who looks like Jing Yuan from the game Honkai Star Rail. Alas, his name was not Jing Yuan, but Chu Tianshu, and he was a hired slave. Chu Tianshu was dumbfounded by what was happening around him, because he heard that he was getting married right now. Just recently he broke up with his girlfriend from university, and now he dreamed of marriage. Opening his blue eyes almost like Gojo's the guy Satoru thought about why he had such dreams. He assumed it was because his parents were too worried about him, or he wanted to play too much. Meanwhile, a sleeping waifu arrives at the scene of the event, who is a princess of the western state of Qin named Ji Ruxin. Our enchanted Sigma decided that this was his bride. She was a beauty. Looking at this stunning waifu beauty, Chu Tianshu assumed that the next steps he would plunge his magnificent sword straight into the sheath of this young beauty. However, all the dreams of the protagonist Sigma were destroyed when the battalion commander ordered the newlyweds to lie in a coffin and be buried married. Chu Tianshu was upset, to put it mildly, because he was clearly dissatisfied with the fact that, having found himself in a dream, he was doomed to a posthumous marriage without a wedding night. Chu Tianshu began to blame the unsuccessful dream for everything. The long-haired white wolf so frightened the maids of this temple with his resurrection that they released him, sending the back of our protagonist on a date with the concrete floor. Chu Tianshu managed to get up after such a fall without even crying. He proved that he was a Sigma, but even despite this, he could not deny that it hurt. Suddenly, the man realized that just a couple of seconds ago he felt pain, and using basic logic skills, it was possible to conclude that everything that was happening was not a dream, but reality. The face of our main character immediately noticeably changed. He was no longer in the mood for jokes about Sigma and so on, because he realized that he had recently moved into a low-grade isekai in the ancient Chinese style. Next, Chu Tianshu began to pretend that he was Choso from the magical battle. He was so tense in order to try to extract the memory of the owner of this body. Surprisingly, he succeeded. The original owner of this body also bears the name Chu Tianshu, the youngest son of Chu Yanhong, general of the Xuanwu army of the Qin state. His mother died when he was still young, but he didn't care. After all his needs were fulfilled by servants. They even carried him to the restroom in their arms, and they probably also helped him aim a rifle. Chu Tianshu had strong support, but no physique or talent. Therefore, he was not allowed to practice martial arts. As a result, this young man was spoiled and indulged only in wine and debauchery, but not so long ago, Chu Tianshu went to the next world from an unknown illness. It was obvious that his death was faked. Having obtained all the information about the previous owner, the current one was extremely surprised that he had to be reborn into this cretin. He also did not understand why no one understood that everything was not all right with the stepmother, because she was the obvious culprit in the death. After the Sherlock Holmes of this world solved the state secret in a couple of minutes, he began to criticize the plot of this world, because this plot is so cliched that it won't even be shown in dramas. Meanwhile, two maids who were supposed to carry out the soulless body of our main character ran out into the street shouting to everyone that Mr. Chu Tianshu had risen from the dead. Next, we watch the same stepmother, the obvious murderer and empress of this state. The stepmother is indignant upon hearing about the resurrection of her son, because it is not permissible to speak such heresy when the empress herself is nearby. However, two maids, falling to their knees and pointing in the direction of Chu Tianshu's location, assure the empress that the young master really turned into a zombie or was resurrected. The stepmother was so arrogant and obviously suspicious that instead of checking the situation herself, she sent Murong Shui check the situation. Before letting her niece go to investigate the situation, she approached her and whispered that young Mr. Sigma should not be left alive. The girl answered her stepmother that she had nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, our main character, who was reborn in the body of a young gentleman, lay and suffered from his helplessness due to the physically exhausted and very weak body of this gentleman. Murong appears in front of our main character, Shui, who stood above him like a maniac. Sigma immediately concluded that she had come to kill him, although she was not that strong because she was still in the process of tempering her body. Meanwhile, the same Murong Shui, standing in front of the young master, noticed that he was sweating. She asked if he was feeling unwell, and she also invited him to conduct an examination. However, the offer of inspection was the same deception as the discounts on AliExpress, because as soon as this crazy woman touched the hand of our main character, she immediately used her technique. During his life, our main character was probably an ardent fan of isekai, because he knew that the main characters in this genre always have some kind of ability. Meanwhile, this girl drilled his mind with her technique. As soon as our main character found himself in mortal danger, his ultimate ability was activated, and when mortal danger was detected, the dream system was activated. Immediately after performing the technique, a notification appeared in front of Sigma's eyes that he had received a noob gift set and the X-ray vision skill, and he also got the chance to spin the roulette once, just like in mobile games. Being in a dying state, the young master wondered what kind of dream system it was and what abilities it had, and what it was capable of. However, thoughts of death quickly left the mind of our Sigma when he realized that with X-ray vision, he would be able to see blood vessels, bones, and other indescribable places in a person. Seeing the flame, he concluded that this must be the aura that martial artists possess. The greater the aura, the greater the power. Meanwhile, the girl was shocked that her technique left this guy alive. However, the girl was not very sad that she could not cope with this guy in one blow, after which, due to her great superiority and strength, she simply pulled him towards her, and Sigma with X-ray vision asked her not to move. This battle was clearly not on equal terms, because the original owner of our main character's body did not even go to the restroom by hand, so his physical strength was 0, much like that of Valorant players. However, I call our main character Sigma for a reason, because even in such a difficult battle, the guy managed to turn the battle in his direction by mercilessly squeezing this girl's rice bun. But it was completely untimely, because at that moment other people had already arrived at the battlefield, and the picture they would have found was not the best. After the doors opened, the picture was as follows. Our main character was in complete bewilderment, and the girl who came with the goal of killing him looked like a poor victim who was sitting on the floor. The shameless girl immediately forced tears to flow, after which she told those who came that she had simply come to visit the young master, and he, in turn, wanted to plunge his long sword right into her sheath. The old man was almost not surprised. He explained this by saying that he had long known that Chu Tianshu was a playboy, but who would have thought that he would have the impudence to stick his sword into the sheath of beauties in broad daylight? And her empress spoke out, saying that the reputation of the royal family cannot be tarnished because such a scoundrel does not deserve to be a prince and must be severely punished. Tianshu's face at this moment was indescribable, because with the reputation of the original owner of the body, it was simply not possible to get out of this situation. However, he should have continued to remain calm. Suddenly, stepmother Chu Tianshu knelt down in front of her highness. She called the resurrection of her son a serious event, but she could not deny that he had committed a ridiculous act and disgraced the princess. Apparently, deliberately letting tears run in their family, because the stepmother, having said that she was to blame for Chu Tianshu's upbringing, said that her highness should act impartially because she would not have any complaints. After such a clearly unhelpful speech from the stepmother, who was in no way involved in the first murder of her son, her highness ordered her guards to execute the recently revived young master. However, despite all the circumstances, Chu Tianshu was not going to give up, because he would resist until his last breath. Suddenly, he made a request to the system that he wanted to try his luck. With the help of his request, Chu Tianshu spun the daily wheel like in a mobile game, and he got the life and death acupuncture skill, which can control life and death. The main character hoped that with the help of the skill, he would be able to turn the situation around. Once at the place where the public execution would be carried out, Chu Tianshu drew attention to his late daughter-in-law, or more precisely, he felt the Sigma aura that exuded from her body. Looking at the princess, he realized everything. These blue lights were very weak Sigma energy, which meant that she was still alive. He immediately realized how this could be played to his advantage. Suddenly, being in a very disadvantageous position, the thin young gentleman, putting everything on the line, turned to her highness, saying that he was able to revive the princess. The cunning attempt to escape from our main character was crowned with success, because upon hearing the young gentleman's proposal, her highness immediately became interested, and the guy confirmed what he said and named everything he needed for his technique. However, the imperial Dr. Li Chengqing, or maybe just a boring old man, objected that this simply could not happen. Because he had been practicing medicine for decades and had never heard of such a method, he tried to convince her highness not to listen. As a result, the boring old man and the definitely not suspicious stepmother began to be on the same wavelength, because the two of them tried to convince her highness that the young master should not encroach on the princess's body. However, our main character, using the right emotion, put everyone in their place by saying that his technique is an acupuncture skill that he learned from an ancient scripture, and which can reverse life and death. He also ridiculed the old man. But the empress was already tired of listening to these disputes, Using her majestic tone, she demanded silence in order to say her final word. The Empress, judging by her powerful aura, was embittered. She said that she did not care whether Chu Tianshu was really saying this, but she was giving him a chance, and if he managed to resurrect the princess, then she would arrange their marriage as a joyful event. But if Chu Tianshu fails, the Empress will punish him in all known ways, including deleting his Genshin Impact account right before his eyes. After all, right now, to save the princess and survive or fail to die, in fact, our main character had no choice. Left alone with the Empress and Princess, Chu Tianshu warned Her Highness that in order to perform his technique, he must first remove the items of clothing from the princess and then use needles. Her Highness didn't even argue, because judging by her behavior, she really cared about the princess's life, so she asked our main character to concentrate while she waited outside. After the Empress left the room, it was possible to exhale. Meanwhile, Chu Tianshu looked at the princess and understood that he must begin to create conditions. The princess, being between life and death, despite this, looked simply excellent. We should not forget that the Sigma performing the operation already has X-ray vision. After Chu Tianshu, using the Sigma emotion, had seen enough of the woman, because previously he had rarely had such an opportunity, he began to fulfill his promise. Meanwhile, an hour had passed. The annoying old man standing near the Empress was again talking all sorts of nonsense, like the fact that all this time the young master could be playing with his sword and the princess's scabbard instead of treating him. Meanwhile, the faithful dog reported to her stepmother that, in her opinion, Chu Tianshu has no skills, but he still dares to claim the opposite, so now he is definitely a dead man. Suddenly, all this gossip was interrupted by the fact that the doors in the room in which the operation was carried out opened, and these two gossips were ready to enjoy the spectacle, or rather the failure of our main character. However, it doesn't matter what the mice say behind the kitty's back, because the young master appeared in the field of view of the gossips, and Her Highness, with good news, he notified everyone that the princess had been resurrected. Those who were most surprised were these two gossips, who were the first to be sure that the young master arranged all this just to extend his life. However, in order for those who doubt, that is, everyone, to believe, the young master invited everyone to personally verify that the princess was in good health. However, as soon as everyone entered the room, the annoying grandfather, having checked the pulse, joyfully reported that he knew that the scoundrel did not have any skills, and in addition, he also ruined the remains of the princess. Having heard this news from the walking grandfather, everyone began to persecute our main character, calling him names and demanding that he be punished to the fullest extent of the current law. However, our main character did not spend the Sigma limit for today. He shouted that everyone who is in this room is a bunch of idiots, not doctors, after which he made the Sigma emotion. Next, with a slight movement of his hand, the young gentleman, holding the needle with 2 fingers, which was located right in the center of the princess's forehead, was ready to apply the decisive touch in the princess's resurrection. After the young master took the needle out of the princess's forehead, she coughed up ketchup. Most likely she died from choking on food with ketchup. But it doesn't matter because the dead don't cough. Her Highness was very happy when she saw that the princess, who was considered dead and was about to be buried, began to breathe again, which was a real miracle. But what was more surprised than Her Highness was the same annoying grandfather who made the biggest mistake, because all he did was blame our main character, who in the end turned out to be the one who told the truth. Standing in the middle of the Sigma room, the main character explained to a bunch of idiots that the poison in the princess's body had not yet been completely purified, so he used a needle to seal the corridor of her soul, which would allow the poison to slowly escape. Young Master Chu Tianshu also added that the poison would completely leave the princess's body in 3 days, which meant that she would also regain consciousness in 3 days. After Sigma, the main character put all the upstarts in their place. He pointed to the boring old man doctor and accused him of not only incorrectly determining the cause of death, but also not realizing that the princess was still alive. At this moment, testosterone overwhelmed our main character. He continued the attack on the boring grandfather, saying that he made a lot of noise just recently, so he should retire early and not bother anyone because he is of no use. However, once again, Her Majesty's word was the last. She stopped the argument between the two, saying that what is important now is that the princess is alive, and Chu Tianshu and the princess have already completed the marriage ceremony, which means that the status of Sigma consort is secured. However, the young master still cannot draw his sword to sheath the young princess, because they have not yet reached adulthood, so they will postpone the final touches of the wedding ceremony. Her Highness also announced that from this day on, young Master Chu Tianshu would live with the princess in the palace. Everyone around was terribly angry when they heard this, because he had no skills, No one understood how he cured the princess. The pathetic, envious people could not come to terms with this outcome of events. One of the maids conceived something cunning. She fell to her knees and thanked the queen woman for her kindness, but added that the young master had been fragile since childhood. The woman tried to get Her Highness to order her to have her faithful servants monitor and serve all his needs. But Her Highness replied that she should not worry, because the servants would take care of him. However, this annoying stepmother, who in no way killed the first owner of the body, continued to try to convince Her Highness that her servants should be allowed to keep an eye on her son. She had already begged for permission to monitor Sigma. The main character, Sigma Sherlock Holmes, was surprised that his stepmother was really trying very hard to send him to the next world one more time. But now she was at a dead end, because when he became the princess's husband, her attempts became useless. However, to Sigma's surprise, Her Highness accepted the help of her stepmother, at which point our protagonist repeated the painting painted by the Norwegian expressionist artist Edvard Munch. After these two received the long-awaited permission, they immediately bowed down before their queen, and it was clear from the girl on the left that she was not hiding her sly grin at all. At this moment, young Master Chu Tianshu realized that he was not just a Sigma, but a real outcast Sigma who was not allowed to live from the very beginning, because he was always alone against everyone. However, despite all the difficulties of being a Sigma outcast, our main character, exhaling, firmly determined that in the future, he would have to rely only on himself. Next, Her Highness ordered that all losers leave this room. The only one who should remain was the princess's new husband. The loser had no choice but to obediently leave. When all the idiots left, our main character sadly looked at the floor and sat down at the exit. At that moment, he felt like Ryan Gosling from the movie Blade Runner. But suddenly the Empress asked him what was the matter. Sigma the outcast dissatisfiedly replied that he was fine, but he regretted that he could not really save the princess. He explained this by saying that the princess's life was still in danger, but thanks to his technique, there was hope. Hearing that the princess was still in danger, the Empress immediately screamed and asked if it was true, and tears instantly rolled into her eyes. She asked the guy when he planned to continue therapy. Sad and behaving very strangely, the main character replied that today he had already undergone acupuncture, so the procedure could only be repeated by tomorrow. Our main character's condition was associated with recent therapy. His head was dizzy, and his limbs were very weak. Even if he really wanted to pick up the needle, he would not even be able to move it. However, fortunately, the main character did not heal the princess completely, because this is his chance to get more time for further personal development, and the princess was his main guarantee of survival. Meanwhile, Her Highness ordered one of the maids to immediately take the young master to Kuan Yuan. She also intended to send the best doctor there, because the princess's treatment could not be delayed. Then the scene changes. The outcast Sigma is already lying completely exhausted, and the best doctor is already treating him so that, oddly enough, he will quickly treat the princess. Even a doctor needs a doctor. Having completed the examination, the best doctor in the village reported that the young gentleman had weak Sigma energy, anemia, liver, and pulmonary failure, which in total resulted in a short life. The girl who was ordered to bring our main character to the doctor asks him if he has a cure for this, to which the doctor first silently nods his head, and then says that he is powerless here. Despite the fake concern for the patient, we still understand that this girl and this guy's stepmother want only his death. Meanwhile, even traditional medicine with soda did not help him get back on his feet. But Her Highness, unlike these two, was really interested in the health of this guy. She asked the doctor if there were other ways. The grandfather replied that perhaps his mentor could help him, but he had been missing for several months. The situation was this. In the opinion of the best doctor in this state, everyone could only rely on fate, because if he managed to restore his internal energy, then maybe he would last for some more time. Meanwhile, the Empress was deep in thought, because this mentor was difficult to find, and the guy had mastered a technique that could save the princess's life. She continued to wonder whether Sigma could really save her daughter. While these three simpletons left the ward of our main character, he, in turn, cunningly pretending to be asleep, opened his eye, watching as these three walked away. After the supposedly sick Sigma was convinced that he was alone, he called the system, asking it to diagnose his body. ChatGPT asked the guy not to move during the diagnosis. After the diagnostic result was announced, we saw a face full of despair and sadness, because as a result of the diagnosis, GPT chat of the ancient Chinese era reported that extraordinary weakness had been discovered, and he had 7 days, 12 hours, 13 minutes, and 15 seconds left before death. However, despite the not very positive diagnostic result, the GPT chat offered the guy 4 life extension scenarios, or more precisely, the system offered the guy to exchange 5 days of life for choosing a scenario. However, the guy didn't think about the choice for a long time because he still only has 7 days to live, which means it doesn't matter whether he lives 5 more days or not, so he decided that only a fool would press the no button. This sometimes not smart Sigma shouldn't have wasted his money because his last word was no. Thus, the system asked him if he was sure that he wanted to refuse the offer to exchange. The angry GigaChad shouted at the Shaitan machine and was surprised at how poorly thought out its controls were, because this was very bad, because he was going to choose the exchange option without a doubt. However, this diabolical system clearly had a good sense of humor, because it informed the host that in order to change his choice, he needed to spend 2 more lives. Sigma used an angry emotion and with great fury pressed the exchange button, despite the fact that after the exchange he would only have half a day to live. But he didn't care, because if the extension was successful, he had nothing to fear. Next, the system displayed 4 options. In the first option, to prolong the Sigma had to go crazy and wave a knife in the palace. In the second, he needs to earn tens of billions and live for 1,000 years. In the third, he will become lazy and die. In the last option, he will become the King of the Scrolls. The main character, after reading all the life extension options available to him, wondered whether the system was mocking him, because the choice of the last option to become the King of the Scrolls was obvious. Next, we observe 2 notifications from the system. The first congratulates on choosing the option to become the King of the Scrolls, but it takes 5 days to activate. The second notification asked Sigma to close her eyes and receive a gift from the system. After the young master closed his eyes, he entered the system's dream space as a host. Once in this space, the system re-diagnosed the host. The condition was unsatisfactory. It also gave advice to train and become the strongest in the shortest possible time. Meanwhile, Sigma was saturated with mysterious energy. Meanwhile, the young master realized that as long as he was in the dream space, he could practice for an unlimited amount of time and improve his skills by becoming stronger. The guy, being the owner of excellent critical thinking, noticed a mysterious energy that increased his GigaChade Sigma powers, but he did not understand what kind of energy it was. The system immediately gave an answer, saying that this is a feature of this world, the internal energy of a person, which helps pump Sigma energy more efficiently than martial arts. Each of these levels can be divided into 9 sub-levels. People who practice martial arts are equivalent to a Xuan master, and the host needs to collect 100 units of energy to upgrade their level to a Xuan master, thereby extending their life. Hearing this information, the young master was terribly happy because he did not even expect that this so-called work is a deep sleep, during which one can become stronger. He already intended to fight back when he becomes a Yuan master. Suddenly, from the main character's dream, we move into the real world, in which the same girl who serves the young master's stepmother slowly makes her way into his chambers while he sleeps. However, after this girl approached Sigma close enough, the system immediately notified him that someone was approaching him with bad intentions, so the GPT chat asked him to immediately leave the dream. Having received the notification, the guy immediately jumps up like a schoolboy who is late for school because he overslept. He shouts at the girl, saying that for disturbing a person's sleep, she will be punished by God. However, because the guy jumped up from his bed so suddenly, he randomly surrounded himself with 2 beautiful hills with a very smooth surface. Maybe he ended up in the mountains. He completely forgot what he was going to do. After Sigma with cheats burned the girl, she pretended that she was not going to kill him, and the guy said that he needed a good sleep, and she disturbed his sleep in such a boorish way. The girl replied that she was ordered to come here. Critical thinking is back in action. The guy immediately realized that he needed to do something with this girl, because she would interfere with his training while sleeping. Next, the guy put on a smile on his face and asked Jui to bring him a change of clothes and money for expenses. It wouldn't hurt to call the girls either. However, the girl told the guy that after his first death, the stepmother was so angry that she sold them. The guy was in complete shock. Memories are unlocked. The main character remembers that the owner of the body had 2 maids who warmed his bed, and this girl has been with him for 5 years. The guy's look at that moment was indescribable, because his only consolation was destroyed by her. She was unable to hide her killer look from him. Again, critical thinking, and again an idea. The guy declares that because he survived, he demands to buy these twins back. The girl does not understand what the point of this is. This vile girl added that it was their fate, and they had no choice because he would die anyway, so she would take care of him and he didn't need anything else. However, the guy's face at that moment became much more serious than ever. Exhaling, he was going to upset the girl. He said that he was sorry, but she needed to leave him alone. The guy explained to the girl that if he doesn't take care of his body, he will no longer be able to pick up a needle, thereby making the princess's cure impossible. Next, the guy turned on the merciless hunter mode. He got up from his seat and grabbed this girl's rice buns. He was probably hungry because he was sick. The guy asked if she was sure that she could take on such responsibility as taking care of him. The next moment, we watch a girl who turned from a victim into an angry hunter who was ready to tear this guy apart at that moment. At the same moment, such a loud scream was heard that the entire empire, and perhaps even the neighboring one, probably heard this scream. The girl yelled at the guy and asked what he was doing. Then the girls rushed to run away while Sigma asked the girl why she was nervous, because she was sent to look after him, which is why it will be easier for her if she becomes the complete property of our main character. However, the girl's quick escape was interrupted due to the fact that she tripped and fell, having managed to slow down her fall, and the guy at that time convinced her that they were not strangers. At this moment, the girl, finding herself in a completely defenseless position, tried to save herself by saying that he should not think that she would not be able to teach him a lesson, because her mistress gave her every right to do so. However, everything that this girl said was ignored by the main character Sigma, because he was thinking about the hated perspective in quotation marks, because of which he had a perspective from which everything was perfectly visible. Next, our main character realized that he was so weak now, so they wouldn't do anything to him, and the princess couldn't be saved without him. That's why he decided to do what he wanted. That's why he hit this girl's peach. Obviously, the girl was terribly angry because her peach was hit. I wouldn't be happy either if my sandwich was hit, so the girl was already ready to send Sigma to the next world. However, the cold-blooded Gigachad did not even move a millimeter, because at that moment he realized that he was immortal, because no one would dare to harm him until he healed the princess. A couple of seconds later, the girl who came to kill this guy also realized this. Immediately after that, the aura from this power disappeared, and the face of our main character broke into a grin. However, this monster could no longer be stopped. Except that our main character put this girl in her place, he decided to swat the mosquito that was on the girl's cheek. The guy at that moment said that she was not able to teach him any lesson, because she couldn't even hit him. The girl was humiliated and tears were already rolling in, but she continued to control herself. The girl calmed herself with the thought that this guy still only had a week to live, which is why she convinced herself that there was no point in accelerating his life, after which she left the chambers and said that when she returns, she will bring something. In fact, the girl left because it was difficult for her to control herself. The guy, meanwhile, told her before leaving that he liked her figure. He asked her to sleep next to him at night. The joyful guy looked at his hand, which was swollen from a strong blow, however. Now he was sure that this girl would no longer bother him for a while. Immediately after the guy was convinced of this, he climbed into his crib, but not to be lazy, but on the contrary, to continue pumping in his sleep. But by this time, this guy only had half a day to live, so he needed to break through to the level of Master Xuan in order to extend his lifespan. This was the only chance not to die. In order to achieve the coveted title and continue his life, he needed to accumulate 100 units of the mysterious Sigma energy, which itself begins to accumulate after the Sigma falls asleep. Meanwhile, the same servant of the young master's stepmother returned to her to report to her about what had happened. The girl warned her mother that if measures were not taken, the young master would go to another world in 7 days. But the stepmother replied that initially she planned to marry him to the princess so that their family would receive status. The stepmother reminded the girl that at the moment she had only one very important task: to keep an eye on the young master. Having learned that the young master wanted to return the two twins to his bed, the stepmother became angry because this traitor was thinking about such nasty things even in death. The woman asked the maid not to pay attention to it. However, the girl looked at the floor and became shy, and tried to tell the woman that our main character insisted that she slept with him to warm the bed. Hearing this, the stepmother's gaze immediately became much more serious and angrier. She asked the girl if the young master was pestering her. However, upon hearing this theory, the girl immediately backed away, raising her hands, saying that the young master had not yet pestered her. In the next scene, a woman filled with rage and surrounded by an ominous aura stood in front of the girl and told her that if the guy did not die within 7 days, then she should kill him with her own hands. Meanwhile, our main character Sigma was filled with Sigma energy while watching Skibidi toilets in his mind. Energy points grew with each episode watched. After some time, his efforts finally bore fruit. Out of nowhere, a strange cloud of mysterious energy appeared that was different from the rest. Seeing this bundle of energy, the young gentleman was delighted. Apparently all this time he had been trying to achieve this. There was obvious joy on his face. After the guy raised his level, he joyfully jumped out of his bed. He did not expect that he would manage to increase his level in just half a day. He assumed that his life expectancy would increase along with his strength. The notification that appeared above our main character's head confirmed his guesses. It contained congratulations on reaching a new level. And the coolest thing was that he extended his life by 1 year. The guy has already imagined how he found himself opposite that same Murong girl, Shui. He demands fish, and the girl is cautious, thinking that he can use his strength and attack first. However, then something strange happens. In the head of our main character, a girl thinks that the young master's body is suddenly becoming hot, and the girl is in a stimulated state. After a moment, the guy realizes that something is wrong. He acquired the ability of illusion, not hypnosis. However, this girl is a martial artist. The guy can resist her, but nothing more. After thinking a little, the guy decided that he urgently needed to quickly rise to the 6th level in order to become even stronger, and it was for this that the young master fell asleep again. However, once again, finding himself in virtual space, something was wrong. After a while, the guy realized that for some reason he could not condense his energy. Next, another system notification pops up, the text of which asks Sigma to open all the meridians and 720 acupuncture points in his body as soon as possible. Having carefully contradicted the request of the Jeepity Chat of the ancient world and using Sigma thinking, the guy understands that the system wants him to lay the foundation again. Confirming his theory, the guy decided to start with tendons. However, half an hour later, the guy wakes up, and obviously with not very good results, opening points is too slow because it takes an hour to open 1 point, and then it's more difficult. Given this speed, the guy understands that he needs 3 years to open all points. Faced with a difficulty, the guy thinks he comes to the idea that in order to get rid of that girl, the only effective solution will be to find an assistant. The GigaChad's thought processes are interrupted again by the same girl, who loudly opens the doors and follows in the direction of our main character. Coming closer to the table, the girl throws some kind of package on the table. Throwing it, the girl says that she brought what he asked for. Opening the package, the guy finds only clothes inside. The guy, puzzled by this, asks why there are only clothes here when he asked for silver. The girl asked why he needed money if he was going to die anyway. The guy did not answer the question posed by the girl. Instead, he froze in place and focused his gaze on the girl. He was clearly looking for something. Having looked closely with his X-ray vision, the guy understands that it was she who stole his jade. The guy simply needed to return it back. Immediately after Sigma has pinpointed the location of his jade, the guy lunges, grabbing with his hand what belongs to him. The girl does not understand what is happening. Having returned his jade and looking arrogantly at this thief, the young master asks her how dare she hide her master's things, but he notes that it was very brave. Realizing what had happened, the girl looked through the eyes of a killer at the jade that she had just missed. She only asked him how he knew that she had it. The girl was angry because she saved this thing for brother Tianyan. When the girl told her stepmother that the young master asked for money, she refused, saying that she needed money to practice with Tianjan. At that moment, that woman gave that same jade to her so that she could pay for her training with it, because her teacher was returning the next month. The guy left the girl on his knees and told her that this time he would forgive her, but in the future he wouldn't even think about it. At that moment, the guy understood that he shouldn't put too much pressure because she could kill him. However, the course of events moves to a busy street filled with people. This is the inner city of Chengdu, Yahan Street. We watch the main character and that girl with big rice buns walk down the street. The people around are in a panic. The girl tells Sigma that it is difficult to control his temperament and asks him if he is afraid that the Empress will kill him in a fit of anger. The guy replied that he still had a little time left, so why not enjoy this time? Walking further along the busy streets, the two are stopped by a man who asks Sigma if he is by chance the master of Chu. Upon closer inspection, he is surprised that he has indeed been resurrected. Looking at this man, our main character remembers this man. His name is Da Zi Liu. This man is glad to hear that he is remembered. He asks these two what they are doing here and invites them to be their guide. The guy immediately accepts the offer of help and, going straight to the point, asks if he remembers his twin maids. Then he asks him if he knows who bought them. This man points to the Mingyan Tower. We tell the guy that he is just in time, because they were put up for auction in this tower. He also adds that there are many aristocrats among the participants, and it will be extremely difficult to buy them back. However, instead of continuing the idle conversation, Sigma hands a couple of coins to this guy and asks him why he is still standing here and tells him to immediately take him to the auction. Next, the scene of events changes to the very place where the same auction is taking place right now, where the very two maids who belong to our main character are being sold right now. These two sweet and beautiful maids are called Chu-yu and Dong-yu. They are clearly not feeling very well right now. Their feelings are easy to understand, because right now they are standing and being covered as a commodity who knows martial arts, plays the piano and chess, and does calligraphy and painting. However, a guy sitting in the stands with a loser's hairstyle screams from the stands about how dare they put this up for auction, because despite their beauty, everyone knows that they have served Chu Tian-shu for the past 5 years. But the auction host immediately solves the problems of the guy from the stands by saying that he misunderstood. Because Chu Tian-shu now has a serious illness, and these two maids are still so young, all the questions of the guy in the stands disappear. However, the auction host still remains offended to some extent. He dissatisfiedly points his finger at the guy from the stands and says that he has been in this business all his life and his reputation comes first. The rest of the people sitting in the stands at this moment are surprised that something similar will happen to Chu Tian-shu. One of them says that the old man was lucky because he had just used the young master as a shield. The living and healthy young gentleman who has been watching from the stands all this time is displeasedly knocking on the railings because he is angry with his grandfather, who said that he is seriously ill. Meanwhile, another person rose to his feet from the stands and became interested in these maids. He asked to name their price because he could not wait to try what Chu Tian-shu was unable to do. Despite the fact that the starting price was already huge, amounting to 3,000 silver taels, the pressure of new bids could not be stopped. Each bid was instantly outbid by a new bid. At this time, the girl standing behind the young master was grinning. Because the piece of jade that he returned cost a maximum of 3,500, she believed that it was no longer possible for him to ransom the maids. At this time, an old acquaintance of the young master told him that the Minion Pavilion had set the starting price for the twins at 3,500 silver, but at one time Sigma bought them for 6,000. The mischievous girl thought that poor Chu Tian-shu would not even be able to participate in this auction, so in her opinion, he could only stand and watch as someone else bought his maids. While prices continued to rise continuously, Sigma, with a cool head, thought that all today's participants were the children of wealthy aristocrats, for whom this situation looked rather gloomy. But Sigma had an idea. Suddenly, a mysterious woman sitting at the very end of the stands with plump red lips interrupted all the current bets with her bet of 4,500 silver coins. Everyone sitting in the stands looked at the one who named the bet and burst into smiles. Because she was a representative of the largest establishment for adults in the capital, they owned the Flower Shower Pavilion. This big shot, who was one of the owners of the largest adult business, was named Shan Guanyang. There were 2 more girls behind her. Everyone was very surprised after this woman named the bid, because who would have thought that she would also be interested in buying girls whose sheaths had never included a sword? However, those sitting in the stands continued to discuss this incident. Shan Guangyan was born in a place for adults. Even with her talent, she had never worked as a girl with little responsibility, but she had the necessary knowledge to learn it. Young Master comes onto the stage and is forced to upset everyone present at the auction, because since Chu Tian-shu is right here, none of them will take these girls to their home. When the 2 maids saw their old master, they were very happy and tears began to roll into their eyes. The auction host only asked the guy what he was up to. The auction host said that he hoped that the young master was not going to force them to retreat, using his position as the consort of the royal family, because everyone knew that they had not completed the ceremony. However, Gigachad continued to keep his cool and said that he wanted to use Murong Shui as collateral. He also added that he hoped that this would be enough. Murong. At this time, Shui took his hand and asked him if he had gone crazy. However, our main character was angry and asked Shu to shut up, because no one dares to touch his property, and anyone who tries to stop him will immediately become his enemy. He also added, telling the girl if she wants to anger him, then she better think about the consequences. Murong Shui, having heard all this, was so furious that she began to grind her teeth. She remembered her words addressed to her aunt, that if this guy continued to behave like this, then she would not be able to control herself. At this moment, even the auction host was surprised because Murong Shui was in a completely different league, and he thought that Sigma had really gone crazy if he was going to exchange the angel for some maids. But the auction continued despite this. Suddenly, the same girl who had previously set the highest bid told Sigma that this is all about him. After all, he is a frequent guest of their pavilion, and since he craves these girls so much, then she is ready to give them up. This girl had previously heard rumors that a posthumous marriage was concluded between this guy and the princess, after which the 2 of them came to life. But she did not think that all this was true, and now that he became the princess's husband, she cannot afford to insult him. After this speech, ordinary people from the stands began to talk again. This time they began to make fun of Chu Tian-shu, or more precisely, what he was, because anyone who competed with him did not end well. At this moment, the guy realized that his status was not enough to convince them, but he had to remind them of the fear they felt towards the past owner of this body. Suddenly, a guy with long collected hair comes into play, who, unlike everyone else, was not afraid of the consequences and bet 5,000 silver. This man was the son of the Minister of Internal Affairs, Li Xuancheng. In front of this Xuancheng, our main character immediately appeared and was surprised that this little rascal was also here. It turns out that all this time, Sigma had a plan to use him to deal with the payment problem. This little brat immediately called our Sigma a loser and ordered him to stop being so familiar with him, because today he will defeat him. The people around were surprised by the young master's particular audacity. Meanwhile, Sigma said that no matter what interesting places he went to, he always tried to join him. In the end, he always refused to admit defeat. However, Xuancheng did not agree with a single word. Suddenly, the Sigma manipulator asks the loser, "How about making another bet? The rules are the same. If he loses, then the title of #1 playboy in the capital will belong to him." However, this guy with his hair tied up just grinned and said that he didn't care about such nonsense. Instead, he asked what the bet would be. Next, the young gentleman turns to the auction host and says that Xuancheng would like to fight for the title of #1 playboy. He asked the host if he would mind giving them some time. The presenter was not against adding some sparkle to the auction. All the people sitting in the stands were also delighted with the show that was planned, because between these two there were very often some kind of quarrels, and their confrontation aroused special interest. Xuancheng said that Lady Guan has a lot of talents. He asked how about writing a poem and letting the lady choose the winner. The lady liked it and said that it sounded reasonable. However, the young gentleman shrugged his shoulders in response to this and said that he was ashamed to be associated with the likes of this upstart, because poetry and writing are intended for boors and are in no way related to playboys. Surprised, Xuancheng asked Sigma what they should compete in. Chu Tianshu replied that he had not conducted a single training in his entire life and also did not have talent, but he only had one skill. He asked if he was ready to try it. Puzzled by such a strange story about this unique skill, Xuancheng did not understand what this Sigma meant and stood silently with folded hands. After a moment, the young master named his skill. He said that he could accurately recognize the 3 parameters of any girl in this world with just one glance. Xuancheng pointed at the Gigachad with his index finger and laughed, saying that he had mastered this skill at an early age when he was 8 years old. He immediately agreed to this bet. Drawing his sword from behind his back, Xuancheng decided that he would also make a bet. He bet all the money he had on him. However, if he wins it, then our main character will be forced to behave like a dog every time they meet. The same woman who owned the pavilion could not help but note that these young gentlemen made this auction really interesting, in which case she stated that the flower shower pavilion was ready to help them in their dispute. A couple of moments later, we saw 4 beauties from the pavilion. The woman said that these were 4 representatives of their pavilion. She invited them to use them for their competition. After some time, all the participants who took part in this bet came down from their stands and, in full view of everyone, gathered in the most visible place in the center of the street. The girls were already ready. The young Gigachad spoke first, having examined the body of the first girl in a red robe. He said that this girl has a simply amazing body, and then he named her exact parameters with numbers, 90, 60, 90, and Mr. Chu was right. Next was Xuancheng's turn. Looking at the girl in a blue robe, he also gave the correct answer about her parameters, calling the numbers 92, 64, 93. Then these two continued this spectacular competition, in a competition in which the two of them were very good. But it was very difficult to identify the winner due to the ideal abilities of determining the parameters of women. However, they agreed with each other until they started comparing the girls in blue and white clothes. One said that the sizes of the rice buns of these two girls were the same, while the other said that this was impossible. However, according to the men from the stands, it was Xuancheng who was right, because the joysticks of the girl in the green dress were obviously larger than those of the girl in the white dress. They simply could not be the same size. They immediately began to believe that Chu Tianshu had gone completely crazy. However, everything fell into place when a young gentleman approached the girl in green and said that she was cheating and using extra cream in her joysticks to visually enlarge them. When the girl in a green robe took out her cheats from her joysticks, Xuancheng was simply dumbfounded because he was 100% confident in his abilities. Our Gigachad could even make out the linings. Xuancheng immediately admitted defeat and handed our main character 10,000 silver coins. At this time, the main character thought that he had X-ray vision because he sees absolutely everything. It was in this very clever way that Chu Tianshu earned as much as 10,000 silver coins. After winning, he invited the presenter to continue the auction, after which he immediately bet 6,000 silver coins. At this moment, Xuancheng, I realized that this cunning fool had just deceived him and deprived him of his money, and not just deceived him, but deceived him 6,000 times. The people sitting in the stands were extremely disappointed that after all the commotion that took place at the auction, the twins returned to the clutches of Chu Tianshu. The girl who had been watching what was happening at the auction all this time was not upset, because what if Sigma managed to buy back his maids, because his days were numbered anyway? And the woman in red who owned the place for adults could not help but note after this incident that our main character is a very interesting character. After the flow of new bids stopped, the host of this auction was forced to end the show and announced that these twins were going to Mr. Chu Tianshu. In the next scene, we see how the old man from the host of the auction turned into an obedient dog who was currently handing out slave contracts to Chu Yu and Dong Yu. After this fight for the twins finally ended, they ran to their rightful owner and all hugged together. All three were incredibly happy to be reunited. A sudden attack was made on Chu Tianshu. Thanks to his good reflexes, the young master managed to avoid the attacks of Xuancheng, who at the time of the attack shouted that he had conspired with the girl in the green dress. But immediately after Chu Tianshu escaped the attack, the two twins instantly launched a joint retaliatory strike, which forced Xuancheng to fly. Wounded by kicks to the face, Xuancheng fell to his knees and tried to catch his breath. One of his servants approached him and asked him if he was okay. Having risen to his feet, this bastard ordered his faithful dogs to attack the offenders, after which many men in kimonos ran to catch up with the offenders of their boss. However, these twin girls, in addition to their irresistible appearance, had incredible fighting skills. They stood in an ideal joint stance, ready to repel any attack. Immediately after Xuancheng's faithful dogs caught up with the twins, who introduced their heels to the face of their boss, they were literally scattered with perfect kicks. Xuancheng could only hopelessly nod his head from side to side and try to figure out what to do while his servants continued to fly around the entire territory. But the young master who watched this eye candy with folded hands completely forgot that among young girls, these two have fighting abilities at the level of Murong Shui. Having finished mercilessly scattering Xuancheng's servants, the twins again stood in a fighting stance and said that they would not allow anyone to harm their master. Now the young master who was standing with his twin maids was telling Xuancheng, standing opposite, that he knew that he did not know how to lose. Xuancheng asked if he would continue to try to kill him. Drawing his sword, shrouded in some kind of green aura, the guy suggested that this is most likely the last time they will be able to arrange a duel with each other, which is why he must win it at least once at any cost. In response to the invitation to a duel, Gigachad turned into a pacifist and shook his head from side to side and refused his duel, so that Xuancheng can hold his breath and wait for this moment further. However, everything changed when Xuancheng bet 5,000 silver coins on the line for this duel. The young master began preparations for the duel. The master's two maids began to dissuade him from the duel because he had never trained in martial arts before. Even though Li Xuancheng is not at the master level, he is still a cultivator. Chu Tianshu realized that most likely he would have to hide his skills, because if he took the life of his opponent with one blow, he would raise a lot of questions from the crowd. So he announced that he would win a duel without a sword. The crowd around was very surprised that, being ill since birth, the scum of Chu Tianshu accepted the duel, and besides this, he was so arrogant that he even refused to use the sword. Meanwhile, Xuancheng, being greatly offended by such a disdainful attitude towards himself on the part of our protagonist, made a very quick attack towards Sigma in order to kill him. Sigma Gigachad did not escape the blow until the very last second, and then he showed dodging skills that even Sans from Undertale would envy. Even though Chu Tianshu dodged the attacks like a mouse, Xuancheng, overcome with anger, advised him to surrender as quickly as possible because he still had a chance to escape alive. Then we watch how Xuancheng's blow still reaches our main character, and we see in front of us a funny cut of Chu Tianshu. One at a time, everything changes. Our protagonist's rival understands that something is clearly wrong, but he cannot understand what. Before Xuancheng had time to ask Sigma why he didn't dodge the blow, he ended up in some very strange place. He had not yet realized that he had fallen into the genjutsu of our main character. Suddenly, finding himself in an unreal world, Xuancheng sees in front of him our main character, who is completely healthy and exudes a terrifying aura. He understands that he has once again been deceived and has learned some kind of terrible hypnosis. Further, being in the expansion of the territory of Chu Tanshu, he calls him a lying deceiver who dared to use such a dirty trick as hypnosis in a duel. Meanwhile, we are watching what was happening at that moment in the real world. Xuancheng shamefully fell at the feet of our main character and begged him for mercy and the preservation of his life. Right now, in his eyes, our protagonist was the real Sigma assassin Patrick Bateman. The crowd did not understand at all what had happened, because unlike us, they only saw how Xuancheng, swinging his sword a couple of times, suddenly fell to his knees and began to beg for mercy. Next, Chu Tianshu begins to pat his defeated opponent on the head, suggesting that he has some kind of trump card because he has always been an intriguer. However, Liu Xuancheng just suddenly became very scared. Next, Chu Tianshu pointed his finger at the man from the Xuancheng clan and ordered him to get out of here and tell his master to send 5,000 silver to the princess's palace. The twins were delighted. Some Genghis Khan made his way to the young gentleman from the crowd, who apparently had been looking for our main character all the time to tell him something. Genghis Khan bowed to Chu Tianshu and conveyed that Her Majesty asks him to return to the palace and treat the princess. The young master briefly said that he would return soon. Then the twin maids again rushed into an embrace with Chu Tianshu, and an even more joyful Giga Chad, surrounded by beautiful girls, announced that they were all returning home. Returning to the palace and meeting with Her Highness, Chu Tianshu knelt down and greeted the Empress, and she noticed that the young master seemed to have found a way to heal himself. Charged with energy, the young master answered Her Majesty that he would need a couple more days to fully recover. In his head, he was surprised that the Empress could understand that he was cured with just one glance. Having heard the good news, Her Highness sent our protagonist to begin treating the princess. She also added that everything he needed had already been prepared. After the young master arrived at his destination, he guessed that the princess had reached the 6th level of body tempering at a fairly young age, and the violet ray must be her spiritual energy. Taking a closer look at Chu Tianshu realized that the princess was able to concentrate a thread of spiritual energy in such a weak state, and without prior cultivation. He was very envious of her. However, there was one important caveat. Due to the fact that her spirit seed was currently in her brain, if it evolved into a spirit serpent, there would be a high chance of brain damage, which could lead to mental retardation. At this moment, Chu Tianshu was thinking that thanks to her, he was able to survive. Now, no matter what happens next, whether they become husband and wife or not depends on their fate. Today's acupuncture task from Chu Tianshu was to use the thread of her spiritual energy to cleanse her 2nd meridian. It was necessary to remain extremely careful. After a few careful movements, the young master breathed a sigh of relief because his plan had worked, and he began the next stage of treatment. Thanks to these actions, the princess's spiritual energy began to return to her subconscious. When the poison left her body, she should begin to wake up. After a while, as our main character said, the princess began to slowly open her eyes due to the fact that the poison had left her body. The first thing the princess saw after waking up was Chu Tianshu, who asked her if she had woken up, and the princess in turn tried to say something. At this moment, the goal in the head of our main character was to convince the princess by all means that he was a very caring and devoted husband. However, instead of the expected gratitude and the possible insertion of the blade into her sheath, the princess pointed her finger at him and asked if he was that pathetic and insidious tyrant under the name Chu Tianshu. After the princess realized that she was wearing very revealing clothes, she immediately tried to hide and began to burn with shame. The princess turned into Jotaro's stand Kujo Star Platinum and began a merciless aura. But Chu Tianshu tried to calm her down by saying that he came here to heal her and he had no bad intentions. Suddenly, Her Highness enters the room, whose face begins to sparkle at the sight of the princess, calling her by name Ruxin. She is glad that she has woken up and that it is wonderful. After Ruxin saw her mother, she immediately threw herself into her mother's strong embrace. Her Highness asked her why she tried to poison herself, while Chu Tianshu stood behind him and watched the royal reunion. Suddenly, Ruxin informs her mother that she did not try to poison herself. She reports that all this was the work of that maid named Hong Yan. She says that she was poisoned by the cakes she brought. Aura appears around the Empress and her face turns into an angry grimace. She asks her daughter not to worry because her mother will make sure that the matter is investigated. Next, Ruxin asks what Chu Tianshu is doing here and why her mother allowed him to get close to her. She also asked if he removed items of clothing from her to such a state. The Empress briefly replies that it is a long story. Immediately after the conversation with her mother ends, the princess takes out a huge black mace and prepares to turn Chu Tianshu into a chop, but the queen manages to stop her daughter. Next, Her Highness asks Tianshu to leave the room so that her mother can explain everything that happened to her daughter to herself. Chu Tianshu bows and begins to move away, leaving them alone. Immediately after Chu Tanshu leaves the room, Her Highness tells her daughter that she also does not think highly of this man, but thanks to him, Prince Bayu and the others will give up trying to marry her. Ruxin still tries to blame him for having bad intentions, but her mother explains to her that he was just trying to save her, which is much better than watching her life leave her. However, Ruxin still refused to marry him no matter what, because she despises him with all her heart. After this, Her Highness embraces her daughter, who had literally just recently been resurrected, and tells her that she understands her. At this time, our main character is standing outside and looking into the distance, wondering why the previous owner of this body is despised everywhere you go. Suddenly, the thoughts of our protagonist are interrupted by the sudden arrival of a maid, who notifies Her Highness that she has bad news. The maid reports that Prince Bayu has arrived. The Empress immediately understands that he has come here to visit the princess. Meanwhile, Ruxin is in shock. In the next scene, we watch as Her Highness explains to the young master that they are not ready to accept Prince Bayu. She also says that at the moment, our Sigma is the official husband, so it is she who will have to send him away. Our main character is faced with the task of preventing Prince Bayu from entering, and it seems that the Queen has decided to take advantage of Prince Bayu's appearance to get rid of the title our hero received. Our main character understands that he has no chance of failure, because if he fails, he will lose his last trump card and lose protection from the royal family. In any case, he will have to deal with the problem. Approaching the gate, our main character notices that the guard of this city is already having some problems. He decides to get closer to understand what's going on. What a distraught old man demands that the city guards let his master Prince Bayu through to the princess. The guard is surprised at Bayu's impudence and reminds them that this is not their country. Our Gigachad appears in the field of view of the feral mongrels and asks whose mad dog is barking near the princess's palace. This crazy old man's name is Emissary Bayu. He takes out his sword and points it at the young master, calls him an idiot, and asks how he dares insult him. The city guards are surprised at the audacity of this mongrel and inform these savages that they should watch their manners, because in front of them is the husband of their princess. Next, the crazy emissary Bayu recognizes the princess's husband who is standing in front of her, because this is the same world-famous trash Chu Tianshu. Then Bayu says that this loser may be the princess's gentleman. Meanwhile, the crowd on the street is discussing how Chu Tianshu became the princess's husband in the first place, but another resident immediately shuts up this resident, saying that she can't talk about him like that because she has an important status. Suddenly, a huge mount appears on the horizon, on top of which is the same Prince Bayu, who disdainfully addresses our main character, telling him that he heard that his father is an army general. Next, this pompous guy, looking down on our main character, gives him one piece of advice to get out of here as quickly as possible, otherwise he will discredit his father's reputation. He also asks Chu Tianshu if he really believes that he will be able to somehow stop him. The pompous prince continues to talk about how he should get out of the way, because he is going to meet the princess no matter what. Chu Tianshu replies calmly that the princess is his wife, and he himself is able to take care of her, so it is not for him to decide when someone should visit her. At this time, Chu Tianshu wondered whether he really was the Prince of Bayu, because he looked very effeminate, although the residents of Bayu were famous for their large size and excessive masculinity. Next, the terrifying aura of this prince appears in front of our main character. Seeing this, we understand that our main character is not on the same level with him, and the prince has strength equal to Murong Shui. At this time, he thinks that the rumors that Queen Bayu has the ability to tame demonic beasts are true, because they say that horned wolves are capable of killing more than 100 war horses single-handedly. The effeminate prince stroked his horned wolf and said that his wolf especially does not like losers with a sharp tongue, because if he gets excited and no one can stop him. Next, this prince stroked his beloved wolf and began to say that if his wolf kills Chu Tianshu, then he will simply go crazy and get rid of him. But for him, everything will be sad, because his body will be thrown into the trash. While Chu Tianshu was listening to threats against himself, a woman standing behind shouted at him that he simply had to punish this pompous loser for such insults. The crowd also ordered to teach him a lesson. Then this annoying prince, who suddenly appeared, descended from his cattle and went into the woods because he intended to ask for the princess's hand. However, the city guards did not just stand still. Instead, one of the guards tried to stop the scoundrel with a thrust of a halberd, because no one is allowed to enter the princess's courtyard without permission. But the guard was so much lower in power that after he felt the ominous aura of this prince, he could not move. Suddenly, while everyone was scared of this prince, someone stopped him, and this person was our main character, who blocked the path of these two tourists with his hand. Next, Chu Tianshu, with an arrogant expression on his face, he said that even though these people are from the country of barbarians, they should still show at least a drop of respect in a country other than theirs. The prince's henchman was shocked by Chu Tianshu's impudence because he called the prince by name. He also asked him how dare he insult their country, and the prince at this time asked if he really had no respect. Chu Tianshu replied that trying to meet the princess without even asking for an audience with her was one thing, but if he really came here without any gift for the princess, he even doubted that the prince was considering this matter. Prince Bayu was caught. He admitted it and said that he didn't really think about it. Chu Tianshu continued saying that since the prince arrived here without a gift, he should go back and prepare a suitable gift, and only after that return here. The prince's henchman was shocked by the nonsense that Chu Tianshu said, because his prince is already the best gift for the princess, and there is no need to buy anything else. Our young master at that moment was in shock because he caught the prince's henchman at his word, saying that he said right now that his prince is some kind of commodity that can be given to anyone. Hearing this, the henchman immediately hastened to justify it by saying that he didn't mean it and asked him not to listen to this nonsense. But the prince was very furious and, in a fit of rage, ordered the henchman to shut his mouth. The pompous prince further admitted that he indeed arrived without a royal gift, but he still insists on meeting the princess. Finally, he asked our protagonist what he was going to do about it. However, our main character was not at all afraid. Having closed the distance, he said that such an oppressive aura emanates from the prince that even if he kills him, he still cannot win the heart of the princess. Then he asked if he knows what the princess wants most of all. Making sure that the prince was interested in Chu Tianshu's answer, he raised his index finger up like a boar and said that the princess loved poetry most of all. Next, Chu Tianshu pointed 3 fingers and told the prince that if the prince is a true gentleman, then they will write 3 poems each and give them to the princess for evaluation, and the loser undertakes to retreat and never win the princess's heart. Everyone around was shocked by such a very strange bet, because how did the young gentleman even dare to propose such a bet? One of those standing also heard that in addition to his musical talent, he had not read a single book. Another resident of the country confirmed the words, saying that the only thing he can do is draw a turtle, and it was also heard that he uses books as a support for his head. The princess really adored poetry, but everyone was sure that Chu Tianshu's poetry would only disgrace our country. He was afraid that by doing this he would bring endless shame to the princess. Everyone was waiting for the prince's answer to the young gentleman's proposal for a bet related to poetry. In response to this, the effeminate guy laughed loudly. After the prince had laughed enough, he self-confidently pointed a finger at himself and asked Chu Tianshu if he really believed that Hu Buhui only knew how to fight and kill. He continued by saying that he had been reading since he was very young. Next, the prince, feeling his superiority in this bet, invited Chu Tianshu to choose the topic of poetry himself. But surprisingly, Chu Tianshu refused, saying that he proposed a type of competition, so it was the prince who should choose the topic. While the prince stood contentedly with folded arms, his henchmen standing behind him laughed at Chu Tianshu because this loser really dared to compete in poetry with their master. The rest of his henchmen agreed because His Majesty's poetry received the highest praise from scientists and was in no way inferior to their own works. Everyone was confident that his greatness would win. At this time, the niece of our main character's stepmother stood contentedly in the crowd. She was thinking about whether this brat was really trying to play around as best he could. She was wondering what he would do after his defeat. Next, the prince looked at the sky and said that he had been in the Qin state for about half a month and missed his home quite a lot, which is why, as the first poem, he proposes to write about the Beiyu Plains. However, Chu Tianshu, despite the fact that he was not from Beiyu, was not at all embarrassed by this and proposed to start a bet. He was already ready to show the full power of 5,000 years of Chinese culture. Then the people from this street began to call everyone else, saying that they should all come here, because now Prince Beiyu and the princess's damn hubby are going to hold a poetry competition. After one of the men saw what was happening, he told one of the maids that the people had learned about their competition. Then he ordered that Her Majesty the Queen and Princess be immediately informed about this. Meanwhile, the prince's henchman whispered to his master that his humble servant will bring even more people here. In addition to the fact that you will completely destroy this loser, he will also demonstrate his talent to the residents of the Qin state. At this time, Prince Beiyu concentrated to come up with his poem. The silhouettes of the plains of his native land, horses and wild boars immediately popped up in his head. Suddenly, Chu Tianshu broke the silence by saying that it seems Prince Beiyu needs a little more time. It is for this reason that he will start first. Chu Tianshu began to recite the poem. There is grass everywhere on the ancient plain. A year is enough for it to bloom and come to life. While our young master continued to masterfully use his ancient knowledge of Chinese history, everyone around him was greatly impressed and did not understand what was happening. Chu Tianshu continued to speak like a true poet with enormous experience. He talked about the smell from the distances of the old road, about the greenery that, under the sun, clung to the ruins of the walls. The crowd continued to be in complete shock. After Chu Tianshu finished speaking his beautiful poem, invented in a matter of seconds, the prince's dim-witted henchman pointed his finger at our main character and laughed loudly, because the difference between him and his prince, according to him, is too great. Next, this narrow-minded crazy loser turned to his master, and clenching his fist informed the prince that now it was his turn to demonstrate his talent to everyone and show this puppy how a poem should sound. The next moment, the prince gave his servant the most powerful slap in the head of his life. He explained this by saying that his damn ears really are not capable of distinguishing good poems. Next, the white-haired guy turned back to his opponent and admitted that he had indeed underestimated him. He also admitted that in this round he had truly surpassed him. Despite the fact that even the prince himself admitted defeat in this round, his assistant shook his head with displeasure and began accusing Chu Tianshu of cheating because he simply could not write such a poem. Chu Tianshu defended himself by saying that they themselves chose the topic for this round. Our main character asked this idiot if he really wanted to say that his prince was in cahoots with him, but this servant continued to be confident in the scam. However, Chu Tianshu, picking his nose, told the prince that if he were not in his place, he would have finished off this likeness of a servant as quickly as possible, because he constantly does not know what he is talking about. This prince's servant immediately began to ask his majesty not to listen to this scum. After all, he was born in the western state of Qin, and he would not dare to harm them. However, the prince briefly ordered his servant to shut his mouth. Then, turning to the main character, the prince suggested simply ignoring his servant, because let the theme of their next confrontation be the beauty of Princess Ruxin. In the next scene, we watch as the maid informs Her Majesty the Empress and the princess that right now, the princess's husband and Prince Beiyu are organizing a poetry competition. Her Highness is dissatisfied. She thinks that Chu Tianshu has gone crazy, because out of all the possible options, he chose the poetry competition and made a real show out of it all. Princess Ruxin, in turn, tells her mother that she warned her that this guy cannot be relied on and, be that as it may, he remained just ordinary trash. Suddenly, we watch another maid run towards the scene at full speed. She is clearly carrying important news. Having reached Her Highness the Empress and her daughter the Princess, she bows and hands over a bundle of paper. She reports that this is a poem by her husband, the theme of which is the Beiyu Plains. However, despite the importance of what happened, Princess Ruxin silently takes the package with the poem of our main character from the hands of the maid. Opening the poem, these two believe that there is some kind of gibberish inside, but when they open the parchment, they are surprised and do not believe their eyes. Or more precisely, they do not believe that Chu Tianshu could have written something like this. However, these two are assured that this is really a poem that was invented by Chu Tianshu, because their humble maid saw everything with her own eyes. Still, admitting that the poem is not bad, she throws it away, saying that this is a poem about the Beiyu Plains. She is more than sure that he did this in order to win over Prince Beiyu. Before the princess has time to draw a conclusion about the first poem, she is interrupted by a maid who abruptly comes running and informs her that the second poem from her husband is already ready. This time, Princess Ruxin asks her maid to read this poem out loud because she does not know what he wrote this time. Next, the maid, holding a large piece of parchment in front of her, reads a poem addressed to Ruxin herself. The poem itself talks about the incredible beauty and magnificent look of the princess. Ruxin was very surprised that Chu Tianshu wrote all these beautiful romantic words about her. Her Highness at the same time was also surprised that he had surpassed himself and praised the princess very much, calling her a beauty who is capable of capturing nations and cities. Her Highness, after reading the letter, noticed how her daughter was very embarrassed. Seeing this, she patted her on the head, saying that she was really not so beautiful as to rule over entire nations. After Chu Tianshu finished the conversation in the language of facts, he said that now it was the prince's turn. He also continued by saying that he wanted to hear the lines with which he would describe the beauty of the princess. However, the prince was not so stupid, and at some point he realized that he was not able to compete in poetry with our main character. After hearing the verse, he said that no one could overcome this in 1,000 years, and if he tried, he would simply make a fool of himself. Therefore, he admitted defeat. The crowd was in complete amazement at this real show. Outside, they were talking about how beautiful their beautiful princess was, and they were also wondering how Chu Tianshu could succeed so much in poetry while being a complete idiot. Crazy but not smart servant told his master that Chu Tianshu had been a womanizer from a very young age. He was sure that he had his eyes on the princess for a long time, and he was again looking for where he could cheat. However, surprisingly, the crowd sided with the foreigners. They agreed with the henchman, saying that given the character of Chu Tianshu, he could easily ask some scientist to write him this poem. Despite all the negative statements that reigned around our main character, he continued to maintain the composure of a Sigma and simply stood silent. In order to dispel all the doubts of the crowd around him, he did the following. He invited the strangers to choose the topic for the third poem themselves. However, the prince from the distant lands did not intend to choose any topic for the third poem. Instead, he reminded Chu Tianshu that he had already admitted defeat. But the prince continues by saying that if he insists, he would like to see if he can write a poem that will be passed on from mouth to mouth for the next 1,000 years. He named the topic for the poem as the soldiers of their two countries. Then, after thinking quite a bit in silence, Chu Tianshu again spreads his arms to the sides to recite a poem. First, about a soldier of a foreign country, he pronounces the first lines. The prince is pierced by the line that from time immemorial his soldiers went on military campaigns, but only a few returned home. He was sure that these lines were more suitable to express the feelings of his soldiers. After listening to the poem to the end, the prince turns to Chu Tianshu, leaving a review that this poem was simply divine, and today he was given a great honor and he happily admits his defeat. He further promised our main character who stood in front of him that this poem would be passed down to the Bayou by word of mouth for 1,000 years. Next, this guy's incompetent servant turns to him saying that he does not consider him a loser, and at this time the prince himself worships Chu Tianshu, and the servant says that, apparently, poetry is Chu Tianshu's strong point. Next, this idiot lunges with his huge sword towards Chu Tianshu, with the words that this brat is trying to prevent his meeting with the princess of their empire. Tianshu with his blow, and stops having received a very severe wound in the torso from behind. His master turns to him, asking him whether his barbaric nature has disgraced him enough. Everyone around looked around and ran away in different directions, but they were united by one thing. No one understood why the prince of the Bayou lands killed his servant. At this time, the prince himself explained this to his servant, saying that he declares that he is pursuing his interests, but he is constantly trying to discredit his name. He also added that his brother Chu Tianshu was right when he said that he should get rid of such a pathetic resemblance to a servant as quickly as possible. That is why, for the sake of future relations and exchange of culture between the Bayou and the western state of Qin, he is going to ask the emperor of these lands to hold a friendly duel with brother Chu, and he hopes that his proposal will be accepted. Then the soldiers and the prince of the Bayou lands himself went somewhere away, and the prince, already on his horned wolf, called everyone to follow him. The surprised maids and other people were surprised. They asked our main character if he was really going to go with Prince Bayou. Chu Tianshu himself, without hesitation, answered for a long time that the prince accepted his poetic challenge, which is why it would be rude for him to refuse him like that. He asked those around him why they could not say a word, whether they were amazed by his magnificence. However, the girl who was interested in killing the young master all this time was very angry when she heard this, because he really wants to take advantage of the duel to gain time. However, Chu Tianshu refuted everything that this girl had in mind, because he calmly walked somewhere to the side, saying that he would definitely defeat the prince. At this time, we understand that Chu Tianshu so confidently walked towards Her Majesty the Empress and her daughter, the princess of these lands. They clearly did not look at him very well. However, Chu Tianshu scratched his head and smiled, and said that he managed to send this prince away as they asked him to. He asked them if they were happy that he had coped with the task. However, Her Highness explained the reason for their discontent as briefly as possible, saying that they already knew that Chu Tianshu agreed to a friendly duel with Prince Hu Buhui. She immediately asked him if he had any plan, because it is difficult to tell from a person whether he has any martial arts skills, but according to Chu, Tianshu was weak and his level of body hardening was clearly less, so he had zero chance. Before answering the questions of Her Highness the Empress, Chu Tianshu asked the queen to first allow him to close the doors, but the queen objected, saying that the news about their duel had already become public knowledge, so closing the doors was useless. After closing the doors, Chu Tianshu objected to what the queen said, saying that in truth, right now he is at the level of a mystical practitioner, so he is not as weak as they think. Hearing this, Her Highness the Empress and her daughter the Princess were shocked, because the birth of a mystical practitioner is an extremely rare occurrence, approximately 1 in a million cases. They wondered if this was really true. Chu Tianshu apologized for hiding his abilities from them, but he did this so as not to arouse suspicion from his stepmother, which he had to cultivate in secret from everyone for many years. Otherwise, he would not have been able to resurrect himself and save the princess, and to be honest, there is also a mystical sprout inside the princess. While he was treating her, he took it upon himself to activate it. Then the girl looked down at her body and noticed that there was indeed a mystical sprout in her body. She was surprised because she could not even guess about it. Next, the princess was enveloped in an aura of incredible power. All this was connected with the same mystical sprout that Chu Tianshu himself activated during his treatment. After the princess made a diagnosis of her own body, she actually found in her body a clot of energy that Chu Tianshu had spoken about activating. Immediately after Princess Ruxin ascertained the authenticity of Chu Tianshu's words, she immediately told her mother about this. Her Majesty was glad, because from that moment on, her daughter would also be a mystical practitioner. After this, Chu Tianshu gathered his hands together and told Her Majesty that he would only need 1 month to defeat Hu Bu Hui. Having announced this, he began to humbly ask for support from the Empress. However, the Empress could not refuse. She immediately replied that she would provide assistance and help him focus on his cultivation so that no one would interfere with him. After that, Her Majesty approached Chu Tianshu and, placing her hand on his shoulder, told him that she couldn't wait for his introduction, to which Chu Tianshu thanked the Empress. Chu Tianshu at that moment realized that he had achieved an increase in the Empress's sympathy, but at that moment, he also noticed how Princess Ruxin was boring into him with her gaze at that moment. Then, passing by Chu Tianshu, the princess told him that she admits that he is not as vile as they say about him. She also admitted that she owes him her life and will never forget it. After hearing what Chu Tianshu heard, he was very happy because he had finally achieved an increase in his deplorable reputation. Now, in order to become stronger, he needed to stay below the water, quieter than the grass, because the element of surprise would only play into his hands. Then the course of events is transferred, and we watch the same loser from the auction who shamefully lost in a duel and in a bet to our main character, while he, imitating Sigma, stood by a tree. His henchmen played some kind of game. As he watched them spend their ridiculous time, he wondered why he had to spend his time with this bunch of useless idiots. After completing this simple game, one of the players comes up to his master and says that he is surprised that he will be able to predict the victory of his black general, so he invited him to divide the money from the winnings equally. However, he briefly answered that he should keep this money for himself to buy new beetles. Then the guy asked the master where he was going, because classes would begin very soon. To which Master Li replied that he could go wherever he wanted. Next, we watch as Master Li's location changes, and he comes to the market street. The guy who is on his tail reminds him that classes at the university begin today, and it seems now is not the best time to skip. However, Master Li continued to eat pumpkin seeds and replied that he did not like literature classes. After all, he was destined to become the #1 person in the capital. Next, we see how a resident with a suspiciously long nose shouts throughout the street that breaking news, a poetry competition took place between the prince consort and Prince Tsem Bei Yu. Chu Tianshu composed 3 poems that in the same seconds became legendary works. Everyone immediately surrounded this guy and started buying copies of these legendary works written by our main character from him. Master Li instructed his man to also take 1 copy. After the man, having difficulty completing the assignment, took out one of the copies of the works written by the young gentleman, he called his master to look at them. After Master Li read the contents of these works, he simply could not believe that it was really written by Chu Tianshu. But the person next to him told him that even great scientists would not be able to come up with something like this over the next century. Master Li was so angry that he turned into a character from Dragon Ball and squeezed the paper with the works of Chu Tianshu. He was determined that he would definitely defeat him. Next, Master Li's man told the people who were supposed to take the money to go back and tell the servants that they would not pay the rate of 5,000 silver. However, Master Li immediately kicked this old man with incredible power, saying what kind of impudence and does he want people to consider him a liar. He also added that he lost to him in a fair fight and must defeat him in the same way. The servant apologized and said that he would immediately prepare payment. Next, Master Li accelerated and ran somewhere to the side. The old man asked him where he was going at such speed, to which he would receive the answer that he was running to class to study poetry. After all, Master Li firmly determined that the next time he met with the young master, he would certainly defeat him in any bet, which is why he ran to class to study poetry. The girl who owned the place where adult men spent time also heard these works. She was surprised that Chu Tianshu was hiding his abilities. Her servant suggested that someone else wrote these poems for him. However, the girl said that this was impossible, because the prince personally chose the themes of the poems, and there were a lot of people around him, moreover, who could even come up with something like that. Then this woman broke into a smile, and again admitted that Chu Tianshu was indeed a very interesting person, clearly hiding something interesting. At the same time we observe what is happening in the royal family. Western Emperor Ge sees the princess and tells her that she scared him to death. He is also glad that everything is fine with her. Inside this luxurious building, Her Highness told the Emperor that in addition to her recovery, she was able to awaken mystical powers within herself, while the princess's daddy tried to look at his daughter. At this moment, the queen agreed that all this became possible only thanks to Chu Tianshu. She also told the Emperor that he should reward him in full for his great works. Upon hearing this, the Emperor visibly became gloomy. However, a second later, the old man scratched his gray beard and admitted that the young master had done a good deed, and he really should reward him properly for his deeds. Meanwhile, Princess Ruxin interrupted her father, saying that indeed his skills were hard to deny, but before he received his reward, he had to survive the upcoming duel. After the father asked his daughter if she was worried about the upcoming duel, the princess was surprised by asking if he already knew about this event. Next, the emperor pats his daughter on the head and asks her whether the emperor himself could not know something about which all the people are on their ears. Next, the emperor says that the prince was literally here recently and asked him for permission for this duel. He agreed, and their duel will take place in half a month. And after that, they will decide who will become the princess's husband. The princess's eyes turned red at that moment, and she said that these two were trying to control her destiny. How could she agree to marry them? She added that next time she would kill them both. Hearing such a gloomy and terrifying speech, the emperor realized that his daughter was exactly like her mother down to the smallest detail, while the mother herself stood in the background, breaking into a smile. Next, the emperor asked his wife what he had heard about the poetry competition, but he asked her to tell him more about it, after which the empress told in detail everything that happened. After the empress handed her husband a paper on which there were copies of 3 works that Chu Tianshu invented, the emperor was shocked because he did not expect that this guy had the talent of a poet. After the emperor read everything, he could not help but notice how wonderful the poems were. He would never have thought that Tianshu had such talent. He asked if these were really his works. The empress replied that this was so. He wrote them right during the competition. But when it comes to fighting skills, he immediately pales in comparison to Hu Bu Hui. Then the empress hoped that he was able to help our main character by postponing the duel for another half a month. The emperor answered his wife that time was not a problem, but did he really have a chance? The empress replied that even despite the fact that he was a mystic, he had literally recently been on the verge of death. It would be extremely difficult to win a victory in half a month. However, the empress was sure that if the period was increased by another 15 days, the young master would certainly win the upcoming duel. Suddenly, the emperor declares that he always trusted sensitive intuition and added that she would never talk about something that she herself was not sure of and would never do something that had no benefit. The emperor asked his wife if his guesses were correct, that she was going to take Chu Tianshu under her wing, to which the empress nodded silently. She added that this boy was not simple, and only they knew that he was not favored in the Chu family. Her Highness continued by saying that everything he did in the past was just a facade. In order to survive, he had to hide his abilities from his stepmother. They also couldn't help but talk about Chu Yanhong, who was a famous general of the mystical army, because his eldest son had already become a mystic, and his second son had above-average strength. They had the potential to surpass their father. And if the youngest son, that is our main character, becomes a mystic, then the Chu family will become too strong. Next, the emperor, addressing his wife, says that the Chu family could consider Chu Tianshu their sacrificial lamb, but they will not do this. The emperor at this moment became much more serious than before. He suggested that perhaps taking Chu Tianshu under his wing would be an extremely wise choice. Then he ordered everyone to convey his decree. The order was that the duel between Chu Tianshu and Prince Beiyu would take place in a month. At this moment, we are watching Chu Tianshu himself, who at this moment is sleeping in a mystical space, pumping up his abilities. Next, we watch Princess Ruxin, who apparently just finished reading about how this is the secret technique of the heavenly heart. a real family heirloom. However, the princess was probably tired from the tedious reading of this big book. She was wondering what mystical arts Tianshu was studying, after which she yawned and rubbed her eyes. She also hoped that everything our main character does is not just bragging, and he is not going to give up at the very beginning of the upcoming duel. Next, the princess jumped out of her bed and landed on the floor, deciding that she now simply needed to visit Chu Tianshu. She explained her zeal by the fact that she had in her hands a book with a secret technique that Chu Tianshu could study. After that, she immediately went to him. Tianshu's location, she saw an obviously not very simple picture. Chu Tianshu was sitting and idle, while around him were two beautiful maids whom he had recently bought back. The face of Princess Ruxin, who saw this picture, was simply indescribable. It was scary to imagine what she would do next after what she saw. Judging by the loss of flowers from the young master, he also anticipated that what would happen next was clearly not going to end well. He asked the princess if she had already returned from the imperial palace. Next, Princess Ruxin, approaching Chu Tianshu, mercilessly pulled his ear and called him an idiot, because while she was bending over backwards to help him, he was having fun with some girls. Next, these two maids immediately bowed to the princess and tried to convince her that the princess had misunderstood everything. The second maid explained to her that they were the maids of their master, and they were simply massaging his back and neck. Chu Tianshu also added that he bought them back from the merchants, and he had nothing bad in his thoughts. The princess grabbed her husband by the kimono and asked if he didn't have enough maids in the palace. Suddenly, Master Li appears on the scene, holding the promised money in his hands. He declares that he is a man of his word and has come to pay his bills. However, Master Li appeared at a completely inopportune time, because right now the princess, in a rage, turned to Master Li and asked who he even was and what right he had to break into the princess's palace. Being frightened, the guy introduced himself as Li Xuancheng, the son of the Minister of Internal Affairs. He explained that he and Chu, that is, with the consort, made one bet, and he came to pay off his debt in the amount of 5,000 silver. Chu Tianshu tried to calm the princess by saying that he was indeed telling the truth, and he ordered the guards to let him in if he came with money. The princess became even more angry, and flames emanated from her eyes. She began to furiously scold Chu Tianshu for daring to gamble as a consort. Master Li, standing behind, tried to clarify the situation by telling the princess that this was not about gambling. He continued by saying that the two of them wanted to get maids and eventually agreed that they would compete in a competition that determined the final buyer, and having lost, he owed him 5,000. After listening to Master Li's version, the princess asked Chu Tianshu if all this was true. Our main character, scared to death, raised his hand and swore that everything said was the pure truth. Next is Princess Ruxin reminded that at the moment, Chu Tianshu must focus all his strength on the duel with Hu Bu Hui, because if he loses, she will be forced to marry him, in which case she will send Chu Tianshu to the gulag and then end her life and be buried with him. Chu Tianshu assured the princess that he would certainly win this duel, after which the princess turned around and followed the exit from this room. After the two were convinced that the princess had really left, Chu Tianshu began to thank Master Li for helping him out of this mess, because otherwise, he would not have been able to explain this to the princess. Tianshu's hand and told him not to be arrogant, because he brought him money. But in their next duel, they will compete in poetry. Hearing the desire to compete, Chu Tianshu made a grimace and asked him if he was really going to compete with him in poetry, because he couldn't win even if he spent 8 lives on it. To which Master Li replied, "We'll see." After Master Li also left the premises, 2 of his personal maids fell to their knees and begged for forgiveness for getting him into trouble. Chu Tianshu reassured them by saying that this was a common misunderstanding. The young master then lifted them up from their knees and told them that they shouldn't cry about this. Instead, he told them to just continue to look after him. Chu Tianshu told his maids not to even think that being a first-level mystic, he decided to go against an opponent of the 6th stage of body tempering. He added that in just 1 month he would certainly defeat him. The 2 lovely maids were very surprised when they heard that their master once managed to become a mystic. They also asked their master how he managed to defeat Master Li last time, because they still did not understand what happened in that battle. Chu Tianshu began to explain that their master was lucky to have a talent that allowed him to practice mystical arts, and it was thanks to these arts that he was able to defeat Li Xuancheng. Next, Chu Tianshu's eye glowed with a dark aura because he intended to demonstrate his abilities on one of his maids. Next, with the help of his ability to create illusions, Chu Tianshu moved his maid into an empty space in an instant. She looked around and did not understand how this happened. After this, a few seconds later, the maid of our main character, being in the space created by the illusion, went into an unknown fall down. Then the maid abruptly returned to the real world, but judging by her face, one could see that she clearly liked this experience. Chu Tianshu, dispelling the illusion, approached and asked amazing or this. The maid, who had a very hard time coming to her senses, replied that her master's skills were truly amazing and very strong. These chambers of our main character were clearly more like a passage yard, because a girl appeared on the horizon and told our main character that she had just stepped out of the threshold, and he was already debauched to the fullest. This girl, folding her hands, warned Chu Tianshu that his recklessness would lead him to the grave, and this would be inevitable. However, Chu Tianshu again defended his beautiful maids. He replied that even if so, it was none of her business, because from now on she would live in the guest room. This damn Mu Rongshui always spoiled the mood of our main character. As soon as this annoying girl tried to say something, our Sigma closed her mouth, telling her so that she would not forget that now he is a consort and his affairs no longer concern her. The girl continued to try to control herself. She reluctantly agreed to move into the guest room. She continued to endure it because, be that as it may, she continued to believe that he had only 7 days to live. When this girl, having endured the insults, left, Chu Tianshu whispered that he knew that Chu Yu and Dong Yu are spiritually connected, and if they work together, they will have enough strength to defeat a third-stage martial artist. Sigma further explained his question by saying that Mu Rongshui is under the influence of his stepmother, and she always wanted to harm him, and he intends to get rid of her. But for this, he will need help, so they must cultivate as hard as possible. After some time, Chu Tianshu lay and read notifications from the system, congratulating him on opening the 36 meridians. The system also advised him to hurry up and open all 720 meridians in order to be able to cultivate mystical arts. Watching the notifications, Chu Tianshu realized that the process of pumping him was going too slowly. He wondered if he could somehow speed up this process. Suddenly, a brilliant idea unexpectedly came to our main character. He remembered that he has acupuncture, and in fact, by using it on himself, he can speed up the opening of the meridians. Taking the needle in his hands and looking at it, Chu Tianshu understood that he should try to do this because even if he fails, he is not in any mortal danger. Trying to perform magical acupuncture, our main character spent a lot of time doing this activity. The time of day changed to dark and a beautiful moon was visible. Watching our main character, we understand that he achieved success because his plan worked, and he called himself a genius because he became a mystic of the first stage but with all open meridians. Suddenly, our main character received a notification that he was congratulated for discovering all 720 meridians. He received the eyes of a lunar star in honor of reaching all the meridians. Looking at the ceiling of his chambers, he realized that from that moment his eyes were able to absorb the mystical power of the moon and stars, because he saw a huge flow of energy that had previously been invisible to him. Next, he received another message from the system, which notified him that he had unlocked the illusory art of lunar reflection. With the help of this ability, he was able to bring to life anything that his mind could imagine. Immediately after Sigma realized what his new skill was truly capable of, he immediately began to imagine everything that everyone in his place would imagine. He introduced his 2 beautiful maids who were wearing very attractive attire that he could make with the help of his new technique. Next, he introduced his wife, who was also in clothes changed with the help of his new technique. In his imagination, his wife called him to bed because it was already quite warm in her. His imagination was not even stingy in imagining the very girl who wants to kill him in a very attractive pose. She asked him to thrust the sword of our protagonist into her sheath as quickly as possible. Thinking about this, our main character became very dizzy, and he understood that he should not abuse this ability because it would harm his whole body. As soon as he felt weak, he realized that he needed to rest a little. As soon as Sigma, joyful from acquiring a new wonderful ability, went to bed, a mystical power gradually came to him in the amount of 0.01 per millisecond. 7 whole days passed. We observed that it was a beautiful day outside, and a butterfly was sitting on a flower. In front of our main character's chambers stood the same girl who wished him death. She understood that it was already the 8th day, and Chu Tianshu should have already been dead. Entering the young master's chambers with a joyful face instead of a dead guy, she found a pumped-up young gentleman who, apparently, had recently taken a cold shower because it raises testosterone levels. After the girl found the young master alive, she immediately went to his stepmother with news about this. She said that from her words he should have already been dead. The woman said that it was so, and she herself did not understand, because all these days Chu Tianshu simply slept without leaving the room. The girl explained that she came to his chambers with the thought that he was already dead, but she could not expect that he would leave his room alive and very fresh. The woman briefly replied that it was time to exterminate him. Turning around, his stepmother said that before they thought that he might decide to avenge his mother, but now, having studied with one of the strongest teachers, Tanyan has reached the level of a magic expert. The woman assured that they should not worry too much. She again sent the girl back to Chu Tianshu to wait a moment and get rid of him. Clenching her fist, Shu accepted her mistress's order and answered her that she would get rid of him today. She was sure because she still thought that he was very weak. We are again transported to the chambers of our main character, but now it was nearing evening. Meanwhile, Sigma had reached the level of a second-stage mystic, and his term was extended by another year. X-ray vision was also improved. Now he could study his evolved abilities. The next moment, Sigma woke up and was surprised that he managed to gain a new level so quickly, because at this rate in a month he could reach the level of a mystic of the entire 5th stage. He literally became stronger while lying in bed. Next, we watch a scene in which Sigma sits at the table, and his maids are behind him. Jue approaches him with chicken soup, which was prepared especially for him. She explains her act of kindness by saying that her behavior was undignified, which is why she wanted to make amends by cooking this. She asked him to taste her cooking. Sigma replied that it was very nice of her, but he was even uncomfortable. He asked her how she thought about heating his bed tonight. In his thoughts, the hero did not understand what was happening. Were they really trying to butter him up? Suddenly Suiyo, without thinking at all, replied that she would happily warm his bed, because that's what the young master himself ordered. Suddenly, the magical vision of the lunar heads of our main character suspected something clearly wrong, because at some point his eyes sharpened, clearly noticing something. His doubts were completely justified, because looking at the food on the table, he realized from the aura that the food exuded that absolutely everything that was on the table was poisoned. The girl was impatient for the master to taste the food on the table, but Sigma said that he could not eat without his favorite chopsticks. In his thoughts, he thought that he did not expect that this girl would begin to act so quickly. Suddenly, our main character asked this girl to bring him a few more dishes, because he had finally fully recovered, and in honor of this, he wanted to taste some wine to celebrate this event. The girl asked in surprise whether the young gentleman had really recovered completely, to which he confidently replied that he had, and advised her to hurry up with the wine. Walking away, the girl looked back with a malicious grin and thought that now Sigma would eat a lot, and at least he would die with a full belly. She was sure that today would be his last. Suddenly, Sigma got up from his place and turned to his two maids and said that the day of reckoning had finally come. He ordered them to get ready. Pointing at the food with a chopstick, he told the maids that all the food on the table was highly poisoned. Hearing this, the two maids were simply dumbfounded by what they heard. One of them asked if this was the work of Mu Rong Shui, and the second asked if she really wanted to kill him, because this was very stupid. Chu Tianshu, putting down his favorite chopsticks, puts them on a plate and says that this girl had been hatching this plan for a long time, and only because of the word of the imperial doctor that he only had 7 days to live, she did not take any action. Suddenly, Sigma warned his maids that the girl would soon return and even they would have to run away. It would not be possible to run away forever, so sooner or later they would have to face her, which is why Sigma suggested getting rid of her right now. The maids at that moment were determined to listen to every order. They only asked their master what exactly was required of them now. After this, the second stage mystic approached his maids and whispered to them a plan of action to exterminate this girl. After the girl returned with a tray with wine on it, she found a picture of our main character lying on the floor and two maids in a panic trying to do something. They said that he ate a couple of spoons of soup and suddenly lost consciousness. The girl asked the girls not to panic and asked us to take a closer look at the young master. The maid asked Sister Jue to help their master as quickly as possible. After the girl approached Sigma, the maids began to run away under the pretext that they were going after the doctor, but the killer woman ordered them to stay in place. Turning to them, she said if they did not stop right now, then she would be forced to finish them off on the spot. At this moment, the girl was surrounded by an evil aura. After such a terrible threat, the girls supposedly had no choice but to listen to the order and stop in place and tremble in horror. Smiling maliciously, she told the young master that it was she who poisoned the food. After activation, the poison would begin to corrode his internal organs and kill him from the inside, to which Sigma replied why she did this. Suddenly, the girl felt like an edit and asked if he really didn't understand anything, because he was destined to die 7 days ago. But he still remained alive. She asked him if he had any idea how many times she wanted to kill him in the last few days. Sigma, who at that moment was pretending to be dying, asked the girl if she was afraid of his mother's wrath when she found out that she was behind his murder. However, when she heard this, the girl laughed, saying that he couldn't even imagine what his mother looked like, because he didn't even understand why his aunt had raised him like garbage all this time. The reason for this was precisely his worthless mother. The girl continued to shout at the dying Sigma, saying that his biological mother was a simple woman who did terrible things for money and gave birth to another scum. If the aunt had not been afraid of the consequences, he would have been dead a long time ago. Then the girl grabbed Sigma by the neck and decided since he was on the verge of death, she would tell him why they were killing him right now. The fact is that Brother Tan Yang had reached the level of an expert mystic, and now he has an even stronger teacher. The girl with a terrifying expression on her face continued to strangle our main character, saying that such trash as him should not have been born into this world at all. Suddenly, something unexpected happened. The Empress herself abruptly entered the chambers. Entering the room, she asked the girl how dare she send the consort. She ordered her to kneel. The girl was in complete shock because the Empress had to return to her residence. She did not understand how she ended up here. Then something more unexpected happened. The Empress grabbed this girl by the head, which drove this killer even more into a corner. Looking at the Empress, she saw how her image was blurring, and it didn't seem like it to her. She didn't understand what was happening around and who was really standing in front of her. Suddenly, she saw how Her Highness transformed into Chu Tianxie, who stood with a very pleased face. For the girl, this was a real shock, because she was completely confused about what her eyes were seeing. Suddenly, it dawns on the girl that everything she saw before was all just an illusion. She becomes furious, and her eye lights up with fire. She shouted at him and said that he would answer for fooling her. However, it was already too late. The next moment, the girl received 2 serious injuries from behind from 2 of the young master's maids. Everything that just happened was part of a carefully planned plan. The 2 servants of Mr. Chu Tianshu continued to inflict merciless wounds while talking about how she dared to encroach on the life of their master. It was simply unforgivable for them. The girl entered berserk mode. Her body released a huge amount of energy, which is why everyone around scattered to the sides. She said that even together, they could not kill her. Next, the girl entered berserker mode and attacked our main character with huge fangs on her hands to inflict a mortal wound. Fortunately, our main character managed to dodge at the very last moment. He was surprised that the 6th stage of body hardening gives such strong resistance. This girl was beside herself with rage. She continued a barrage of merciless blows at Chu Tianshu, who found it more difficult to dodge the blows with each subsequent attack. Our main character, driven into a corner, realized that this was too much because he did not expect that even with such wounds, she would have so much strength left in her. Suddenly, a moment later, Chu Tianshu saw an attack that was no longer possible to dodge because he saw it too late. This brutal blow filled with rage fell directly on the solar plexus of our main character. This blade attack was so powerful that it sent our main character flying. The consequences of this blow would certainly be very serious. The maids were horrified that such a severe blow had reached their master. They screamed in horror. This girl was determined not to rest until the spirit left Chu Tianshu's body, which is why she gave it her all. Next, we observe the weakened body of our main character, which is nailed to the wall with a blade.